theme of the podcast this week is an election special presidential quotes edition of the Valuability podcast. And as I was thinking about my opening story, the only real connection I have to anybody famous that's not entertainment, that's more governmental, was when I was a baby. My dad was stationed in Greece, and he went up to Germany with the military, and in the process of being in Germany met George S. Patton IV, so the son of the World War II George S. Patton, who was George S. Patton Jr., except he was actually the third, so that's why his son is the fourth. It's very confusing, but it's the son of the World War II general, was stationed in Germany.
I hope people got that. Don't go back, because that was confusing. But
George S. Patton Jr. was the World War II guy. He was not actually Junior. He was the third, but he went by Junior for some reason. I think just because his dad went by George Patton, and so he just went by Junior. And so it ended up that his son is actually George S. Patton IV. So silly bit of trivia. But anyway, I got a baby gift from George S. Patton. When my dad got back to Greece, the general had sent a baby gift down to us in Greece. And then that made me think of, are there any other stories in my family? And it's actually a much better story. Is my mother in the summer of 1991 worked at the Supreme Court Library, had an internship at the Supreme Court Library. And of course, being a female law student, Sandra Day O'Connor was her hero, a role model and hero. And she worked in the back, in the stacks, pulling books for the librarians that interacted with the clerks who interacted with the judges. So she was several steps away from the justices, and the location of her desk was, back in the back by the freight elevator, and she just never saw anybody. So having orthopedic problems, she would take off her shoes while she was back at her desk. And one day the freight elevator opens up and out walks Sandra Day O'Connor. My mom jumps up in her stocking feet and introduces herself and is saying, telling Justice O'Connor how much of a role model she is. And she said that she was very pleasant and nice, and did notice that she wasn't wearing her shoes and didn't say anything about it. Was very, very polite. But of course, my mom, when she tells the story, says, "Damn it, the one time I get to meet my role model and I'm standing there in my stocking feet."
Wow, that's a great story.
Yeah,
I had two. One, our boys. Since you brought it up, Lisa's. Let me see. It would be Lisa's great grandfather, and of course, our boys, and of course our grandson. With our boys, it's great grandfather was a U.S. Supreme Court justice.
Oh wow!
Yeah, Pierce Butler, back in the Franklin Roosevelt days. Then I spent 45 minutes in a room with Bill Clinton. And down in Arkansas, and the room was, the gold, you remember the dubious medal of a dubious honor or badge of honor. This is back in the 80s when you flew so much, you got upgraded to the was it the concierge?
The club.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, in Arkansas, the club, it was probably 8 by 10, and there was just Bill and I. We had to wait. I knew he was the governor at that time,
Sure.
but I always kind of regret. Nice enough guy. He was busy too, but there was the quiet time. But I was dead tired. Just came off a 2-day session of training. Didn't really want to communicate or talk, and but would have been interesting. So I didn't really have any dialogue with him, just a small chit chat.
Well, so we do have a presidential connection. That's awesome. The Valuability Podcast, episode 35, election special, presidential quotes. The Valuability Podcast is for financial professionals, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor and product wholesaler for 20 years in the financial services industry. My co-host, friend, and mentor is Philip Simonson. He was also a financial advisor, field leader, sales trainer, and senior manager covering areas such as advisor development and field operations. So I have a somewhat presidential connection with my name. So my full name, of course, is Walter Danforth Fleek. I go by my middle name, Danforth.
Are you three sticks? Are you a three stick or are you a two stick?
Everybody always says that, especially from my boarding school, right? You got a cake-eating silver spoon, Walter Danforth Fleek.
It's a great name. I love it.
There are friends of mine from high school who will fight me that I'm a third. I am absolutely the first and only. I was named after my two grandfathers, Walter Herbert and Edmund Danforth. So I'm not. I would have been Walter Herbert the third had my dad kept my dad's name. But no, I was named after my two grandfathers.
Okay.
So I am the first, the one and only. There is a Walter E. Fleek in West Virginia, whom I think is related to us. But I've never met. So there are three Walter Fleeks, an H, an E, and a D. So I do have to be careful about that when signing up for things. There's more than one W Fleek out there. But my middle name, Danforth, has a somewhat presidential connection. And do you know what it is, Philip?
You stumped me. I don't have the top of my head. No.
So I say somewhat because it's vice presidential. James Danforth Quayle. Dan Quayle and I share a middle name, and it actually does come from the same family.
Poor Quayle. I fit right in with Quayle. I couldn't spell worth a crap. You couldn't either.
He got a little bit of a raw deal on that.
Oh, he sure did get a raw deal, and the old man Bush. I can't remember the eulogy the prime minister said. He said, in essence, and George knew it was not one of his strengths, was the English language. However, he could connect with the people, and it was pretty much that old saying, "Hear what I mean, not what I say," and we'll do just fine. And George was able to. He just made light of it when he made his faux pas.
That would be nice. Well, you can find the Valuability Podcast at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We also have a YouTube channel. Search Value-Ability on YouTube to find us there. Or you can find us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the Episodes tab, and our player is there. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. If you would like to connect with us, you can email us at info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. Please send in questions, ideas for upcoming episodes, or if you would like to potentially be a guest, reach out to us there. Or you can touch base with us through our social media links. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook links are all available at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. So, before we jump in, I just need to give attribution to the person that collated this list. I did reach out to him on Twitter, and he did not get back to me. I requested, even though Twitter is fair game, you're publishing it to the internet. I always try to ask people before I use their stuff, especially if they put work into it. And this gentleman didn't get back to me, but I did want to at least give him attribution. His name is Anand Chakavalu. He's a chartered financial analyst and is actually the editor-in-chief for the Motley Fool. I will go ahead and put up his Twitter link on our website under the content tab. So with a link to the original Twitter feed, so you can read it in that format if you would like. And I just wanted to make sure that I gave attribution to him, as he mentioned that he went through thousands of quotes, and I pretty much believe it with this list. It's, think 45. It's 45 quotes. It's a lot. So definitely a lot of work, and we very much appreciate it. And it really is a fantastic list. And Philip, you wanted to start out with number one, George Washington. His quote is, "We must consult our means rather than our wishes."
Yes, and I just, again, when do people get in trouble? When they start, they're always wishing for more. Can't live with the delayed gratification. Live within their means. Um, those are words of wisdom there. And but it's all this stuff as we'll go through it, Dan. Might as well state it right now. And it's simple in concept, but not necessarily easy in implementation. Particularly finding out what's your needs versus your wants, and that's what same thing into modern day means than our wishes versus our needs versus our wants.
Absolutely. And I talk about that very specifically with people when I'm discussing income planning,
Mm-hmm.
because I really tell them up front that it shouldn't be called income planning. It really should be called expense planning, because in retirement, it's all about your expenses. It's all about managing your expenses to fit your income correctly.
Right.
And so many people get there, and just because they have that kind of release feeling of, hey, I've worked my whole life to get to this point, I'm going to do what I darn well please now. And I would always caution people and say, I totally understand those emotions, but it puts you at risk to treat your retirement that way. And it's not all that hard of a mental switch. We talked about this in one of our very first episodes, the need, fun, love concept,
Right.
of managing to the past rather than managing to the future. So many financial advisors sit down each year and say, oh, I think the market's going to do X% this year, so you can do this. Nobody runs a business that way. I mean, you sit down with a business plan to say, I think this is what's going to happen. But with a business, you're constantly reviewing all those numbers. Businesses mostly make those decisions based on their prior year results. And that's the kind of switch in income planning. Interestingly, our guest next week, we'll talk more about that, because that's, I think, part of their approach to income planning as well. My next one was actually a link between 3, Thomas Jefferson, and
Mm-hmm.
8, Martin Van Buren, who both talk about banks. Thomas Jefferson's quote at number 3 is, "I sincerely believe that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale." Now, Martin Van Buren, a little while later at 8, "Banks properly established and conducted are highly useful to the business of the country, and will doubtless continue to exist in the states so long as they conform to their laws and are found to be safe and beneficial." Now, that entire time frame where they were talking about the establishment, I believe, of the Federal Reserve, yes, and unifying the money supply, because back then the states all had separate money and,
Right.
and different forms of, and that was
Hamilton. We got to get Hamilton was with the Federal Reserve, of course, and we
right,
know the history with Van Buren.
right, and that is back to politics today, right? The states versus the feds, and wanting to solve things at the federal level versus wanting to solve things at the state level without getting sidetracked into the minutia of that. That's one of the things I always say when people are like, oh, things are so different today. And In reality, we've been having the same national conversation for 250 years. It's just a continuation in different forms and
Hmm. That's
different
right.
areas of the country for different reasons with demographic changes are responding differently. So, yeah, I thought that was very interesting to see. Yeah. Even back then, you had leaders with wildly different visions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think, when we're talking about this country at that time, with Jefferson was really, the first generation of Americans. And, if you were born back then between, I think, 1776 to 1800, you didn't have any knowledge and actual experience of living in colonial times. So this was that first generation of Americans, and Thomas Jefferson probably was the most had probably the biggest influence on this generation. But but remember, we had 6 million people in this country, and 85% of them were farmers by trade. So and living in the rural area at that time. Um, you needed everything you needed to know. You had it down by the age 15 because it was all about farming, and you got married and had children, and that was your labor. And then we started, as you said, Dan, as you start progressing, education. We became very. That's probably one of the greatest gifts we've given our people in this country is free education, and that allows them to continue to hone their skills and add value to our society versus having to be born into it.
And that's a really great point. The War of 1812, which I believe was in Madison. I've read a book on it, although as I age, my memory gets worse and worse. I believe it was Mr. Madison's war. The War of
Yeah,
1812
no, you're
was
right. That's
really,
exactly right. It
yep.
was Madison. She saved. Oh, the famous thing when it was the British getting even from 1776.
Well, but there was also a group of people that wanted to annex Canada.
Right.
And so, like,
Well, that's we. There's a little of
I,
that.
and it's but still super interesting from the standpoint of like one of the big problems was like the New York militia marched to the border of New York, and then half the militia said, "No, we don't operate outside of New York because we're New Yorkers." And so they couldn't militarily do what they wanted to do because people at that time really still looked at the country as a collection of independent entities. And so the War of 1812 really had a unifying effect on the country of making it really for the first time. And to your point, it was the first group of people that started to think of themselves as Americans as opposed to,
Right.
Virginians or, Pennsylvanians or New Yorkers.
Well, here's another facto to that. And after the War of 1812, the veterans received 160 acres of land. So it created that surge for, continued creating this, well, started the surge going west. And some veterans might have, set up a store to sell the bounty. There was always a brisk trade in paper involved in land back then, because that was the key. But most of them went west, and that was when you had these states of the Northwest and the old Southwest coming into the Union, and people moved west. Again, here's Jefferson, because Jefferson, you know, he laid down the challenge, and it was let me see it goes something. Americans are ambitious because the lowest can aspire to as much as the highest. At that time, there was a more of a level playing field because there wasn't a lot of educated people. We came from Europe, and we came with the old you know white Anglo-Saxon Protestant values, etc. So frugality was a big one for us, and we'll see that as we continue going through the quotes. But a little history there, I thought I'd just throw
Right.
in.
I love the fact as well, also giving reference to some of the political issues going on at the time. Number 4 and 5, James Madison 4 and James Monroe at 5, both have to do with taxes. James Madison's quote is, "I cannot undertake to lay my finger on that article of the Constitution which granted a right to Congress of expending on objects of benevolence the money of their constituents." Very, very specifically and eloquently speaking about taxation. And then James Monroe at 5, "To impose taxes with the public exigencies require them is an obligation of the most sacred character, especially with a free people." So vastly different views there.
Yes. Absolutely. Do you think Madison, when he's saying, granted the right of Congress to expending on objects of benevolence, are we talking the concept today, modern term, pork belly?
I think it's just straight. Yeah, I think it's just straight taxation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
Oh, that
basically
absolutely. Sorry. Yeah.
a comment against the federal government being able to tax. I think is what it's saying, that the Constitution does not grant the federal government the right
Correct.
to spend, and of course that has.
But the objects of benevolence, look, I can do this, I can tax, and as a result of that, I've got this money. And as we know, governments, in the private sector, you get rewarded for creating net income and saving and being productive with less versus oftentimes the government,
Right.
hey, spend it or lose it. And then they would throw in, we can always tax more, as it's saying there, and we'll throw on some of these pork bellies and treat some of certain constituents better than others because I'll get your vote this way.
It would be interesting to see what the context of that is. I didn't read it quite as that. I read it as um, even spending on things that are going to make the welfare of the people better. It's still, the Constitution doesn't grant the government the right to do it. I thought I saw that phrase as maybe in response to something where someone is saying, making an argument of, well, but look at all this good that we can do with if the federal government were to do these things. And I saw that as just a response of saying, yeah, well, that's great, but I can't find it in the Constitution where it
Right.
says that it can be done. That was kind of my read on it, although interesting could very much be. This is one of the things we talk about a lot in terms of legal opinion in this country is, what did that word mean?
Yes. And particularly
Then,
in that time period.
right. And, there are certain legal philosophies that depend very greatly on the semantics of what a word meant at the time versus what it means today. And so, yeah, it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about that. What's your next quote?
I like number 7.
Number 7, Andrew Jackson. "It is to be regretted that the rich and powerful too often bend the acts of government to their own selfish purposes." Yeah.
All right. I mean, power, with that old saying, what's power if you don't use it? That's very applicable to that one. And that power is one hell of a aphrodisiac. Um, and it doesn't matter, in every generation we see this. Um, and that's where, I'm not going to get into, but boy, a person of character, high integrity, you hope and pray that, you put in good leaders. And most of our leaders who do go in, and I mean into the government sector, they're coming from the business, they go in with the good ideals, values, but oftentimes I think, what I've seen is they come out compromised, and it's just so much give and take, and this power, it's something.
Sound like a good old-fashioned anarchist there. Simonson.
Well, I tell you this, Dan, and some of these
Power
will
government corrupts no matter what. I
it
don't
it, it,
know where you heard that.
yeah, it
Not from me. Just so people know, I philosophically do uh, identify myself as an anarchist. If you don't know, not it's not the bomb throwing image. We have a very bad PR department. The concept of anarchism is basically much more in line what people describe as libertarianism. So
right.
individual liberty over hierarchical structure and authority, and that is one of the tenets of that, is that the process of going into government compromises you, and that even though you have the best intentions, and you see examples of that everywhere, and this quote is still you see today in the movements on both the left and the right, the Sanders campaign, Trump, uh,
Yep.
very obviously, is the support of those types of candidates is very distinctly a response to this kind of thought process.
Well, yes, and I agree, and I also add to it from a historical perspective. And I wish I could quote these two authors. I'll look around while we're talking. But in throughout history, there are those people with lower economic ability want more government. Those people with higher economic ability, and again, historically, have wanted less government. And and oftentimes, then knowing that, a lot of the politicians, it's going to buy the vote of those who have lower economic ability. You do need a government to take care of those people who you know have been disabled, widowed, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I see myself more as a moderate conservative, also a libertarian. I think I'd have to label myself there, but I've been independent. I mean, I've voted Democrat, voted Republican, but I know this. Um, I just don't. I oftentimes don't see the government making good decisions, and drives me crazy.
Well, it's interesting. It links to number 9, William Henry Harrison. All the measures of the government are directed to the purpose of making the rich richer and the poor poorer.
Wow,
And
what
I,
was that bad? But
that's a little extreme.
that's a
I didn't
little
know
extreme.
he was quite that aggressive on that
Hmm.
side, but
Well, I
yeah.
would say if that was the case, and if it's stood the test of time, with that his philosophy there, or uh, we would have had a revolution already,
Right.
right? Because history also goes uh, from uh, from a republic to I want to say to a dictatorship, to a republic, to a democracy, back to a dictatorship is how it usually cycles through. So we would have had. I think if that would have, we can move on. I like number 10 too.
Number 10, James Tyler. Wealth can only be accumulated by the earnings of industry and the savings of frugality. Yeah, I circled that one as well. That lines very closely with our financial thought process.
Yeah, doesn't it though? And it's what we said before is that concept, and like we started off with GW. Live within your means. If that old 70-20-10. Um, You made $10,000. You live on 7. You save 2,000, and you invest 1,000 for the future. Um, and just hope and pray you've got time and a good advisor, and you can also live with delayed gratification, not have to tap into it and spend it down. So then you'll do okay. You'll do okay. Ben Franklin got that down. We don't have him because he never made a president, but he's got some great quotes on money.
Thought number 13 was very interesting. Millard Fillmore. It is a national disgrace that our presidents, after having occupied the highest position in the country, should be cast adrift and perhaps be compelled to keep a corner grocery for subsistence.
Well, woe pity me. That's
That's
what I
exactly
thought.
that's exactly my thought process. Was
You know,
even back then you had uh, politicians whining about how bad they have it.
yeah, I'd say you have a problem with, again, number 10. Go talk to one of your predecessors, James Taylor. But interesting also, presidents had to pay for their own groceries and their household goods, etc. So, you just because you're in that office, if not everything was given. And they didn't, it wasn't a big paying job. It still isn't to today with the amount of responsibilities and compare it to CEOs. Not even close.
No, the concept of government and was much less professional than
Hmm.
it is today. And in fact, that's one of my consistent gripes about the way we look at government as a people now, is this just acceptance of it as professionalization and the commoditization of our participation as citizens has become very much, and you see this throughout our society, of specialization, commoditization, trading essentially money for services and looking at things as professional, as opposed to feeling that you have a responsibility within the community, and without getting completely off in the weeds. I find this a big struggle with people, and how they view policing, of not a discussion of the issues that have been going on in that area, but in terms of how people call the police for getting the wrong order at McDonald's, right? Like, just it's this complete gross misunderstanding of your role within society and then the role of police to help out. And it has to do with this professionalization that, oh well, I pay my taxes, or I fund this government, and so I deserve to get this service. And the extent to which people in our society think of, like, really, you think it's the cops job
Listen,
to come and get your
listen,
Big Mac for you? Like,
Dan.
those kind of things just always bend my mind.
Yeah, well, bend mine, and we're not going to go into these weeds. First, I would say, look, where's the parents? Raise them right. The next quote there. I like.
Which
Uh,
one?
Let me pull it up. It's number 15, and James
That's
Buchanan.
James Buchanan. Hard work is important no matter what the work is.
Yeah, work is not a four-letter word. I'm grateful, and I was just saying this to Lisa just the other day, for my parents. They taught me about work. They taught me about self-discipline. They taught me about being frugal, um, and those have served me well. What you can't keep doing is, in my opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, you can't. We got to build up the self-esteem, and that's the hardest job you have as a parent in raising a child, is making sure your children grow up with a healthy self-esteem so they can survive on their own out there and don't have to depend. They're giving to society, and they're not taking from society. And I that we have a change. There needs to be a change of thinking in that, and that has to start at the home. In my opinion, it's because this is still a great country, and there's great opportunities. I think, and someone can put a factoid on this and check it, but the millionaire's mind. First generation um, of all the millionaires in this country, the first generations still make up the vast majority. Not by whatever their profession is, but they take the opportunity of the free education and what this country offers, and they go for it. So yeah, it's not an entitlement mentality. That's not healthy for anyone.
We cannot skip 16, Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, big day.
Moral principle is a looser bond than pecuniary interest, and pecuniary just means monetary. So
That's why we have Dan on this show, folks, because
I had to look it up.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
I thought I knew what it meant, but I just had to be sure. So
I was
did have to
clueless.
look
I'll
it
just
up.
tell you.
I did look it up. So basically just saying that being in debt, it motivates people more than moral principles. So the banker is a more powerful influence on your life than the minister.
Well said, Dan. No, why say blah blah when you can say blah? Let's go to the next one. Very good.
My next one would be Rutherford B. Hayes.
I had that one too.
Yeah. Let every man, every corporation, and especially let every village, town, and city, every county and state get out of debt and keep out of debt. It is the debtor that is ruined by hard times. Yeah, I think, if I'm not incorrect, Rutherford B. Hayes is the president that lost the popular vote and actually lost the electoral college vote as well. And then it was basically a decision made to end the Reconstruction, where a few southern states accepted the fact that he was going to be president as long as Reconstruction ended. I think that's how that history went down.
And I can't remember either, but what I like about that one is, again, from a historical perspective, we were on the gold standard back then. So, you didn't spend more than what you had. Today, we can just print money as a country, and as we all know, we're trillions in debt. But it doesn't matter if managing your own personal financial situation. If you apply that principle, you're gonna survive the hard times. And I've now 63 times around the sun. What I can tell people who are younger listening, there's always going to be a crisis. It's just a question of when. They used to be 35, 40 years, the big ones used to come. Now they seem to be a little bit shorter. So you just want to also make sure you have, if you're not in debt, so you can survive that one. Because, well, hell, we're going to skip the Truman. I'm going to segue right into it. You and I both laughed. We didn't know. It's a line I've used and you've heard me for many years say it. The difference between a recession and a depression. It's a recession when your neighbor's out of work. It's a depression when you're out of work.
Yeah, the specific quote is, "It's a recession when your neighbor loses his job. It's a depression when you lose yours." Number 33, Harry Truman. I'm sure that I heard that from you. That has to have been where I got that.
I just and geez, you gotta be can be able to live with the delayed gratification. Self discipline, self accountability is crucial. But back to you. I had Garfield, the next one.
Where's Garfield? Yep. He who also circled that one. He who controls the money supply of a nation controls the nation.
The purse strings. That doesn't change much from the old medieval days either.
Right. Back in medieval times, you had each individual state minting their own coins. That's really very, very interesting. One of the things I've learned in watching history documentaries. Money back then, what people would do is they'd carve off pieces of coins and then melt the shavings down and then mint new coins from those shavings. And so people will find, old Roman coins that have been kind of cut off. So always and forever in human history, there's people trying to control economics and then people trying to subvert it, right?
Well, yes, yes, and also, with the kings and queens back in those days, if the treasure chest was getting low, because they could tax so much, and people were, they didn't have a lot. It's definitely of course, a Garian state. And what did they do to raise money? Do you recall, Dan?
What country?
Any of them, they all practice it. They would go and kidnap a king or queen or a
Oh,
a child, prince or princess, and
go to
bring them
war.
back. And they'd put them in the dungeon, and they'd make sure they stayed alive. But they would, okay, you can have them back, but there's going to be a ransom.
Yeah, war was always a monetary endeavor, right? The soldiers often would get to, ransom the lower officials. So it went down the line. You had the king would capture, the king of England would go over to France and he'd capture a count and ransom him. But then the foot soldiers would get to ransom the kind of lower level nobles in that realm as well.
So right, and the other is, this one reminds me of, there's throughout history again. There have been those who get there are those, excuse me, who get paid to do the tasks. Then there are those who get paid to manage those who do the tasks. Then there are the few who end up managing the money, and they end up controlling all. And what you can know about those people too, and the Medici family, you can go back to all the families throughout history. They do not, because their number one enemy, and we'll get to it here, the silent embezzler. But they know they're not going to, they're going to buy and hold assets that are able to go up with inflation, because that's going to be the biggest uh, erosion of their purchasing power, is if they don't stay ahead of that inflation. It's been there for throughout the history of the humankind.
Yeah, there's a couple. We jumped up to 33 Harry Truman. There were a couple in the early 20th century. I really liked Woodrow Wilson's at
Let's
28.
let's look at his, Dan.
Yeah, the way to stop financial joyriding is to arrest the chauffeur, not the automobile.
Amen.
I'm guessing that probably was in terms of, don't try to punish business. I think Wilson was pro, allowing businesses to have a pretty free reign, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yeah, and interesting thing there too. Just the automobile wasn't more. I mean, maybe it was 20 years old. But most because he was in the 20s. No, I think he was the
yeah,
begin. Yeah, I think so. Um,
yeah, Hoover was in the Depression,
yeah, Woodrow was
obviously.
also World War One. No, World War
Yep,
One, and um,
yep,
yeah,
yep.
and
That's
so
the right time frame.
1918 in that era. But anyway, so the automobile definitely wasn't more than 10, 15 years old. And it was only the wealthy were able to have them. So I like that one. The number one issue back then, facto, for humankind, or the human race, was, what do you think it was?
And it was still like illness, influenza,
Oh boy, well, 100 years ago, you're exactly right. That was every 100 years a pandemic had come, major one. Uh,
right?
but it was the mode of transportation was horsepower. So for these cities, is, what do you do with the manure?
Right.
That was the issue. That was one of the biggest issues.
Well, many people don't realize that even up through World War II, a large portion of the German army was still horse powered
Yes.
during World War II.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks of during that conflict the tanks and the mobile infantry, and that was all true. There were plenty of those things, but a majority of the supply train and the support troops were all horse driven still. And so, yeah, people, I think, get kind of skewed. Now, I certainly haven't lived in a world where people are riding horses around. So it was, only 20 to 25 years later where that was almost unheard of through most of the world.
Yeah. I like number 30.
Calvin Coolidge, number 30. There is no dignity quite so impressive and no one independence quite so important as living within your means. Yes, I also circled that one.
Right?
Again,
It,
goes back to that the same theme that we started out with, really.
it does. And I would just, it doesn't matter how much you make. What's impressive if is if you're able to live within your means, take care of yourself, take care of your family. My hat's off to those individuals and those families. That's taking personal responsibility. And that goes back to Hayes, the city, every county and state, get out of debt and keep out of debt. Back then, and when even moving forward to Kelvin, fast forward 20, 30 years, it was still, there was a lot of shame. And shame is when um, if you went bankrupt today, there's no moral shame to it.
Well,
We
there was
just ignore it.
prison for
Yeah,
debtors.
well,
Debtors prison.
there was absolutely there was debtor's prison. I don't know when that ended, but boy, might have been there in Hayes's time. Certainly, maybe not Coolidge's. Yeah, but boy, when I was growing up, someone who went bankrupt was not good.
Yeah, same along the same lines as divorce, right?
Yes.
Even in the my mom would always mention that her first marriage, they actually had to lie and say that they had physical arguments because in the state where they had been married, they couldn't get divorced for no reason. There had to be a reason to dissolve the marriage.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely a changing attitude, but a large part of that has been driven by the credit industry, right? Like,
Yes.
I remember the big thing when I was in college, which was early '90s, was credit card companies going on campus
Oh,
and giving credit cards. Now, I got a credit card when I was 16 because I was away from home and my mom wanted me to have it in case of emergencies. But back then, it was unheard of for a kid at that age to have a credit card.
oh yeah.
And so the idea of having credit in college was kind of even odd. I remember walking past them on campus and looking at the I can't remember what company it was, but whatever bank was peddling credit cards, and just like, why on earth would I get a credit card?
I couldn't exactly. Exactly. And it was, geez, I would just at the mailbox, I couldn't believe in late 90s, early 2000s, all these credit cards, you know, applications coming to our sons.
Yep,
What? They're in high
yep,
school. They're just going into, it's going to be starting college. It's, there should have been a law against that.
yeah. Credit. We are a credit society. That is very, very
Hmm.
true. I loved Lyndon Johnson's at 36. In
Hmm.
1790, the nation which had fought a revolution against taxation without representation discovered that some of its citizens weren't much happier about taxation with representation. So you're saying the problem was taxation?
That's it. Oh, there's the old guns and butter. That's where that came from. Funding the Vietnam War and the Great Society at the same time, which leads into the 70s, which The 70s inflation was the Robin Hood of the 70s.
Right.
And poor Carter, and Nixon took us off the um, I'm sorry, with Richard, scrubbing floors and emptying bedpans as much dignity as the presidency. I don't, sorry, don't buy that one. Just saying.
He
I'm
might have said
just,
it.
he might have said it, but I don't think he believed it.
He also said, "I am not a crook." So,
So, uh, and the only, yeah, we will get, that's another story for another time. But Carter, Nixon took us off the gold standard. So then you could just easily print money. And then you get to Carter. And what's
yeah,
he say?
Jimmy Carter, 39. Globalization, as defined by rich people like us, is a very nice thing. You are talking about the internet. You are talking about cell phones. You're talking about computers. This doesn't affect 2/3 of the people of the world.
Now, he said this after his presidency, by the way, because when he definitely 76 to 80 is when he was the president, and the internet was not around then.
Right. Yeah, and
But
the
he's
other
right.
side of that, but the other side of that is, and this is where you see a lot of opportunity, is that this globalization does have the ability to reach into parts of the world. The microfunding. I've read some articles about microfunding loans that are allowing people in developing nations to get access to capital, and in the end, it's about having, for the people who are against globalization, the positives of it are that it allows capital to flow to areas where there are opportunity. And in developed nations, yes, there is still opportunity, but almost all of that opportunity comes from innovation. The thing that I like about this quote is that it gives you the idea that there's still a massive amount of opportunity in the world beyond what we see in the United States and other Western countries.
So I agree, and I'm also going to put a cautionary note on this. One, when globalization started becoming popular as a term back in the turn of the century, globalization did not mean Americanization. Having lived overseas for 5 years, it is everything. Our perspective, we're the greatest. There are other nations, and a good book to read is The Economic Hitman. See what we've also done with the World Bank, etc., and we go into a lot of these developing countries, and we want their resources, or we strategically want the location of their harbor, etc. And what we would do as a country is, oh yeah, we'll help you put in the grid system, electrical system, and we'll increase it. Look, it's gonna the multiplier that we're going to put on this will inflate it. So then we end up, and by the way, who do they have to borrow the money from? Us. And then who does all the work? Our companies over here, not the corporations or companies in that country. So and then all of a sudden, oh, we inflated it so that they end up defaulting on the loan. Well, okay, sorry about that. You know what? We do need your vote coming up on the UN on this, or you know what? We'll take this. We need this canal, or we need this uh, strait here for and we want to put our military base there. It's a great read. It'll open your eyes.
Yeah, certainly the connection between economics and government is always there.
Yep.
Right. And as well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Having lived overseas, I actually I was reading an article that had a great analogy about so living in a world where you have to be impacted by the United States and the impact of its media, I think is what this quote was talking about, is like having a rhinoceros in your living room. It's big, it's impossible to ignore, and if it moves, it wrecks everything.
Well, why don't we? That's beautiful. Should we finish up with the last one?
Yeah, which one do you want
Well,
to
you know which one I'm going to go for.
number 40?
Ronnie.
Ronald Reagan. Yeah, it was the last one. Inflation is as violent as a mugger, as frightening as an armed robber, and as deadly as a hitman.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, Ron, he knew how to use his acting skills. I will give him that. And I just we can go in. We've talked about this one before. It's that silent embezzler, and Dan, you've done it. You know, can't remember which episode. Good one for people to go back and listen to. The Rule of 72 here,
Yep.
and you got to make sure you stay invested in equities for the long term. Inflation, we have not seen it. The last time it was the 70s, and it has not come back. But boy, with all this money we're printing right now, it's something we're going to have to watch. And just a lot of people don't take a look at what is their real rate of return after taxes and after inflation.
Right.
Every year you need to look at that, and you'll be okay. And as long as you're on the right side of that column, the positive side, you'll be okay.
Well, and people understand inflation intellectually, but have a really hard time believing it emotionally.
Oh yeah.
Right? When you tell people things like, "Hey, your first car was $1,500. Now a car's $30,000. By the time you die, a car's going to cost $100,000."
Which that's a common person's car today.
Right, just a regular car.
Yeah, regular car. Those
Right.
Suburbans, whatever, 80 grand. Unbelievable.
Right. So, but people just can't. They're like, "Oh, that just doesn't process until you get there." And it is just that silent, slow drip that actually leads to, told you before we started that we weren't going to do an article review this week, but I did have a little thing that I found on Twitter last night, a little time value of money exercise that I thought was very, very interesting. So say we have John, who invests on 1/1 of 2000, $500,000. Leo invests $100,000 at each market top, at the top of the .com, at the top of right before 9/11, right before the 2008 crisis, right before the December of 18 drop, and then right before COVID, so March of this year. Cole invests $100,000 at each market bottom, but misses the 20 best days in the market.
That's not
so good. No, but he invests at the bottom of all 5 of those. So he has the upside of the fact that he's not investing at the top, he's investing at the bottom, but misses the top 20 days. What do you think? First of all, what do you think the rank will be in terms of who will have the most money?
Oh, now you tell me. I had to stay focused during all that.
So John is 1/1, 500,000.
Straight line.
Leo is the tops, and then Cole is at the bottoms, but misses the 20 best days.
3, 2, 1.
3, 2, 1. So you think Cole?
I'm Cole. I got a nephew, Cole. It's not emotional bias here. I'm just.
It's actually it's in order. The top is John, who invests on 1/1 and just stays invested. The entire time. $1,165,000. Number 2 is Leo, who invests at the market tops,
but he stays in.
But stays in 906,130. And then Cole, who hits every single bottom but misses the top 20, 645,694.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't time the market.
Don't. It's time in the market, not timing the market. And don't let me invest your money. Get a good advisor. That's what I recommend. And I have one.
Oh.
Well, that's all I know about that, Dan.
That is what will wrap us up for this week. If you have topics that you'd like us to cover or questions for us, you can email us at info@value-ability.com or reach out to us via social media. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook links are at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. Please like, review, subscribe, and share if you like our nonsense and ramblings. Please let people know about the podcast. Next episode, episode 36, we actually have rescheduled the folks from Income Lab, and Philip is going to be off next week, so I will be handling that interview on my own, but check back next week for that, and that may be a double episode depending on how long we go. What are some of your favorite quotes about money, finance, and business? We would love to share some extra quotes. So if you're listening out there, go ahead and email us your favorite quotes about money, and we will share them in a future episode. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week. And remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.